clearly, anybody that anticipated a clean, smooth-running Brexit was living in cloud cuckoo land. However, things are going far better than you might be led to believe by much of the media.
That's right. Over the weekend, we saw this enormous figure that Remainers across the media were splashing about on front pages and online. There was supposedly a 68% drop in exports to the European Union. And that sounds like it's an incredible drop. That sounds like the Remainers might have even been vindicated until you dig a little bit deeper down into the figures. And actually what we saw is that that figure came from January this year, when there were halts to trade because of coronavirus, but also when when we were losing up a stockpile that happened in case of a no-deal Brexit. So now that some figures for February are out, we're actually seeing 90% of normal trade levels, even with the mandatory testing that's going on for hauliers.
Indeed so, and unfortunately it's very indicative of a Remain-heavy press. The coverage of any frictions at all will be hugely amplified.
Absolutely. I doubt that there will be this sort of front page of look how much trade has bounded back in the first couple of weeks of February, despite the front page splashes that 68% figure got over the weekend. We're never going to hear the good news now that it's bounding back. It just doesn't attract the same sort of newsworthiness or the headlines. People love to despair in their country for some reason, and I don't quite understand that. I think that sometimes we do need to project a bit more good news about the successes of this country, not least on the vaccination programme that is going like Billio, but also on the benefits that we're starting to see. And as we adjust the new border systems of Brexit, the big disaster that was predicted so many times is simply melting away.
Any success of Brexit or otherwise cannot be established in the coming days, weeks, or even months. It's going to be years before we see how this opportunity plays out.
Absolutely, and whenever there is a slight benefit or whenever there's a new company that moves to the UK, as we've seen repeatedly over the course of the last few months, recently with Cadbury, but also we saw Chanel move from Paris to London. Whenever that happens in the media, it's always despite Brexit. Not as if an independent country with our own regulatory regime might be able to attract businesses here more than the sclerotic and regulating EU can. No, it's always going to be despite Brexit in their framing. Well, actually, just sometimes, it may be because of Brexit that we're able to attract new and innovative business.
Indeed, although deeply concerning to hear the comments of Arlene Foster, the DUP leader, who has pointed out that the EU are very much weaponising the transport of goods from mainland Britain over to Northern Ireland.
I think the EU have been incredibly pernicious with how they've dealt with the entire Ireland situation. I mean, we've saw for the last 4 years how Ireland was really used as a tool in order to try and get one up in the negotiations. And as soon as it was no longer convenient to protect the peace process and the Northern Ireland border, the EU temporarily invoked Article 16 of the protocol and put that border up anyway. We've seen how the EU doesn't care for peace on Ireland. And all they actually want to do is sort of frustrate things. So I think we're going to see a lot of this sort of needless bureaucracy and frustrating just because the EU wants to try and make Brexit seem painful. That's going to be there in the short term. I think that ultimately they'll get bored with it in the long term.
Well, I agree. And I think the awful threat of sectarian violence is something that will focus minds in Brussels, and they will hopefully very quickly stop playing politics with this.
Absolutely. I mean, they only need to listen to their own statements that they were saying for years and years and years about how important it is to protect that peace process. Well, actually, that peace process is two ways. We can't always kowtow to just one side of the peace process because ultimately there are two sides to it. And that means that Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom and must be treated as such. And if you are to respect or read or understand the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, you must understand that it is predicated not only on an all-Ireland policy on some matters, but also that Northern Ireland is an integral constituent part of the United Kingdom.
Do you think they will fix the friction? Because it would be wrong and a disservice to my listeners to gloss over the fact that there are UK businesses having huge problems at the moment selling into Europe. Do you think that these are teething problems which will be resolved? Because my argument has always been that if it's a challenge for us to get our goods over to the continent, well, it cuts both ways.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this will be teething problems. We'll see people learning new systems. But of course, there have been some particular problems in Northern Ireland that Michael Gove stood up in the House of Commons last week to address and set forward a list of ways that we can address it and work with the European Union to make things a lot smoother. And I think that we will ultimately start to see some movement, if only because the EU has undermined their own intellectual position by invoking Article 16 so readily.
Brilliant stuff. Always a treat, Tom. Thanks for joining us. Tom Harwood, writer at Guido Fawkes.